Broadcasting from the Any Hour Services podcast studios, I'm your host, Mike Wilson, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about reverse osmosis water filters. Actually, is it a filter or just a system, or I don't know?
Filter.
Okay, filter. Let's
System. It could be either.
Let's go. In the House is a podcast about the major systems in the house: electrical, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. Each week, we pick a topic and we discuss it in depth. I really appreciate you tuning in once again. Do me a favor. If you're a fan of the show and you haven't left us a review yet, I'd really like to know what you think about the show. Go wherever you listen to podcasts, scroll down to where it says write a review, and leave me some feedback. Let me know what you think about what we're doing here. We got Jeff Holt back in the studio with us today. He's been involved in the water conditioning industry in one form or another for going on 30 years now. Jeff, thanks for coming back.
Oh, no problem.
So RO systems are reverse osmosis systems.
Yes.
In your opinion, do you think more people refer to them as RO systems, or do you think they say reverse osmosis?
You know, reverse osmosis, if you say it that way, that's going to be more prevalent. There's times that I'll be talking to people and I'll be like, yeah, when we look at this RO system, and they just look at me kind of confused, so they're not quite understanding that. But yeah,
gotcha.
You hear it both ways, but
well, when I think of an RO system or a reverse osmosis system, I think of the tank underneath the sink that takes up a lot of space,
okay,
and maybe the cartridge filters, yes, and the little the extra faucet thing on the countertop, for drinking water. Is that the most common kind, or?
It is. Most units, when the like we talked in an episode before about water softeners, those are going to be what's called a point of entry system. Whereas a reverse osmosis system typically is going to be called a point of use system. It's going to be at a specific location.
That makes sense. With the reverse osmosis, what is it actually doing? You said it was a filter, and we talked last time about water softeners. I guess, actually, explain to me water conditioning in general, and like how all of these things kind of fall underneath that umbrella.
So water filtration, there's a bunch of different ways that we can look at it. You can go by particle filtration, microfiltration, nanofiltration, reverse osmosis, water softening, chemical reduction, which is mainly with carbon filters. So, I mean, there's a lot of different faucets when it comes to water purification, depending upon which spectrum we want to kind of dive into. So when we're talking water softener, we're talking mineral removal. When we're talking reverse osmosis, we're going on off of something that's called TDS. So TDS is a very, very, very generic term. It's called for total dissolved solids. So total dissolved solids, when we're talking about that, that's literally anything in the water that's not supposed to be there. So
it's not H2O.
Pretty much. So if it's a chemical, if it's a solid, if it's a sodium, any of those things that are in the water that shouldn't be there, that's what an RO system's working to remove.
So an RO system its job is to remove anything that's not water.
Pretty much.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So they say that tap water is safe to drink, right? Unless you get like a notice from the city or whatever. But so is reverse osmosis more of a preference?
Yeah. I mean, you get people who will, we talked before about taste of water.
Yes.
So a reverse osmosis system is going to really, really, really enhance the taste of the water.
Enhance it.
Yeah. So for me personally, and maybe this is just because I've had it most of my life, but a reverse osmosis system, typically we're going to get a lot better tasting water. And that could just be because I'm used to it. But I live in Eagle Mountain, and the water out there, if anybody out there listening is hearing this, it tastes like dirt. It's gross coming out of the ground. So getting water where it has that objectionable taste, and all this stuff that's in it, we're getting it to a level where it's more palatable, in my opinion, and getting it to where it doesn't have quite as many contaminants in the water.
Gotcha. So yeah, I prefer reverse osmosis water. It tastes more pure. It, like when you say it enhances the taste. I actually think that it like makes it taste more like what you would think water would taste like, which should be nothing, right?
Yeah.
Or does water have a taste?
A lot of people say that water, if it's perfectly pure, it's an empty taste.
Empty.
But it's
So satisfying.
Yeah, you don't get that weird aftertaste if the water's purified. Well, sometimes you'll drink water and after you're done drinking it, you're like, oh, it's got a weird and nasty taste. That usually will go away when you're using a reverse osmosis system.
Gotcha. So with what types of things is it like removing from the water? Like you mentioned solids and things, but you mentioned contaminants. Like what kinds of is there a test to like see how pure, like what kind of test would test how effective your RO system is being?
So we have a TDS monitor that we can use, and it's just a probe test where you dip it in the water and it will give us a number of how many total dissolved solids are in the water. It doesn't tell us what those total dissolved solids are, but it will tell us what the level of total dissolved solids are.
Gotcha.
So if you're breaking it down into chemical, it's on a chemical basis. It could be nitrates, nitrites, fluorides, chlorines. Those are going to be your most common ones. If we're talking about some of your heavy metals, arsenic, aluminum, calcium, copper, all those different things, manganese, mercury. I mean, I can go on and on of all the different things that it's going to pull at a percentage.
So when you say things like arsenic,
yes,
it sounds
scary.
Sounds dangerous, but there are, I guess, what the FDA, is it the FDA that regulates EPA, the water quality?
Yes.
Now, are there acceptable levels of arsenic that can be in the water?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And so we're wanting to remove those things.
So if you're looking at if we wanted to key in on arsenic, anything that's below 10 parts per billion is technically acceptable.
Gotcha.
So if you're in Utah County, if you're building and you're on a private well, you have to have a water quality test. And if it's above 10 parts per million coming out of the ground.
Million or billion?
Billion.
Okay.
With a B. If it's above 10 parts per billion, then you actually have to treat it to remove it. So down like Lakeshore, Benjamin, if you're out west of Spanish Fork and all that farmland area over there, it's actually pretty prevalent over there.
Is that something that is occurring naturally or around farmlands? Is that because of pesticides and things like leaching into the ground?
It's hard to say.
Speculative?
Yeah, it's very speculative. I mean, it's something that could have just been there for years and years. I mean, you find it in mining communities and stuff like that quite a bit. Up in Park City, they had a big issue with arsenic a while back.
Really?
To where they had to put in an arsenic removal system because of the high arsenic levels that they were actually having going through the city water systems. So
let me go this direction then, because we mentioned like a boil order, and like my parents lived down in Mapleton, and last week they had like a boil order down there, and I've had one in Pleasant Grove before, and we've heard about them, periodically they happen. Here's my question: if you have an RO system and a boil order comes through in your city, like, are you good with the RO, or do you still need to boil?
So me personally,
okay,
I would still boil.
Okay.
Mainly it's because I'm not maybe as trusting as I probably should be. But if you look at an RO system, it's actually rated to remove bacteria.
Gotcha.
So if there is bacteria in the water, it'll pull it. The best way to get rid of bacteria, though, is with it's called a UV light, ultraviolet filtration. That's going to be your most effective way to remove it. But if we kind of dive into what a reverse osmosis membrane does, the membrane size is, it's 0.0001 microns in size. So it's just way, way, way tiny. So the membrane, it's almost like a paper with little teeny holes in it.
Yep.
So as the water passes by it, the water molecules can pass through it. Everything that's above that 0.0001 gets trapped, and then there's another flushing system that flushes it down into the drain.
Gotcha.
Most of your bacterias and stuff like that are going to be 0.2 microns in size. So they're way too big to fit through the paper or through that semi-permeable membrane. That being said, RO systems have a 99.9% reduction rate in bacteria. That's what they're rated for, if they're
Gotcha.
working appropriately, if your filters are changed, if you're doing all your good maintenance and stuff like that and upkeep on the system. So can you drink the water? Theoretically, yes.
But we're not recommending it
But
on this show.
I personally, I would follow the city and say, let's keep oiling just to make sure.
Gotcha. So you mentioned you've got the RO membrane, and if you were to look online and look for a reverse osmosis system,
Yes.
they usually have like multiple canisters or multiple filters.
Yeah.
And one of them is an RO or a reverse osmosis filter membrane that has the tiny holes.
Yep.
Right. So what are those other things doing? And if you've got that one membrane, do you need the others?
So the membrane is going to be the one that's doing pretty much all the work.
Mm-hmm.
The other filters are kind of preparing the water to where it can be accepted by the membrane.
So that it doesn't have to do as much.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So if you get a membrane and you put it in and there's any chlorine in the water, usually it will burn that membrane out within 3 weeks to 6 months.
Now, when you say burn it out, like, does it like literally make the holes bigger to where it's not effective, or it just clogs them?
It'll just clog them up.
Gotcha.
It'll almost not melt, but it will just make it to where nothing can pass through the membrane.
Gotcha.
High mineral content. So if your water's over about 10 to 12 parts per grains per gallon.
Hard?
If it's hard water, that'll actually really shorten the life of the membrane. If you have particles in your water that's over 5 microns, that'll damage the membrane. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we want to pre-treat before it hits the membrane. So most of your water filters will have a sediment filter that will knock everything out 5 microns and above. And then it's going to have some type of a carbon filter that's going to pull all your chemical that could damage the membrane. So that's kind of what those other ones are.
What about the hardness?
Hardness, so that's where the recommendations are listed, but we've actually had RO systems that we've installed, the ones that we use, and they've been up in Harriman, where the water is just 50 plus grains hard. And as long as we're doing the yearly maintenance, the membranes do definitely shorten in lifespan, but they still work great.
Well, because here's the thing, like if hardness is that bad for them, I'm pretty sure it's a common thing, especially when you're adding them under the sink, that you're tapping off of that cold water supply right there, and that's the one that softener loops leave hard.
Yep, it is. So
that's how mine's done.
Yeah. So if you look at I've actually got the maximum contaminant levels that they actually want on the ROs that we sell. And it actually lists it as hardness they want it below 170 milligrams per liter. So
how does that translate into grains?
If you get milligrams per liter and you divide it by 17.1, that will get you 2 grains per gallon.
Okay.
So 170, you divide that by 17.1.
Are you doing that math right now?
Yep.
Okay.
170 divided by 17.1. Yeah, that's 9.94, so 10 grains.
Ain't nobody in Utah got 9.
Yeah, so most Utah is going to be well above that.
Because see, on my RO system, it says that like all of the other filters besides the RO membrane, like change them annually, but the RO they're saying lasts 2 years or 24 months or whatever. So if I've got, like, I think at my house I'm like 40 grains hardness.
Yeah.
If that's going to my RO, am I cutting the lifespan of that in half? Probably.
You are. You're cutting it down quite a bit. So out in Eagle Mountain where I live, I've got soft water feeding mine. But if you have soft water feeding a membrane, instead of replacing it every 18 months to 2 years, which is usually about the most that we can get on an RO if it's hard water, I've had my membrane installed for 5 years, and it's still working great.
I'm going to rewire mine, or not. What do you call it when you replumb? I'm going to replumb
You're
mine.
You're going to reroute the water line?
I am, because I just recently did a kitchen remodel. Well, I did a couple of things. When I first had my RO system put in, I really liked the RO, but I would find that when I was getting ice out of the freezer, it was being made with that yucky old tap water, and like the RO water tastes super good, but then once the tap water starts to melt,
you
like
get floaties.
And I'm getting this like weird taste, and I'm like, So I ran a line from I just came off with a tea from my RO and ran to the ice maker to the thing, and it's awesome. Problem solved.
Yep.
Then I remodeled my kitchen, and I actually took my RO system and I put it in the basement right underneath where the thing is, and I still routed a line to the ice maker and have a line going to the thing, but it's right under where the kitchen stuff is. And see, if I had had this conversation with you 6 months ago, I would have not like drilled a hole down, because I still came off of the cold water supply.
Yeah.
So like I wasn't sure, what I was doing or why I was doing that. And so.
No, so you brought something up. You have it down in your basement.
Yeah.
We're actually finding that more and more and more, where people are moving them and putting them under the basement, because the cabinets underneath the sink are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
It's so nice to like have all that room back. Yeah.
Yeah. The ROs that we use, they're called a Microline. So they don't take up too much space, and we use a high gallon rating membrane. So the recovery period, or how fast it makes the water, is really, really fast. By doing that, we can use a smaller storage tank. So we take up a little bit less space, but we'll get our RO systems, and if it's available, we're talking with all the plumbers that we work with, and we're telling people, put them in the mechanical rooms, and we can put something on there. It's called a permeate pump, and it makes it where your pressure's amazing. And then we can use it with a larger storage tank, and then you're not stuck to where you can only use it for drinking. You can use it for all your cooking and all that type of stuff as well. And then you get a lot more effectiveness out of it. Like
Gotcha.
we had a guy that, it was a bigger home, but I think we had 14 takeoffs from an RO.
Wow.
And we put it down in the mechanical room, and he had it going to an ice chest for an under the sink ice maker. I think he had 2 kitchens in his house. We were going to both kitchens, and he put a faucet in every single bathroom for the drinking water.
Wow.
As well as drinking fountains and so on and so forth. So it was going to a lot of different places. So it was about a 35, 40 gallon water storage tank down in the basement.
And coming off of it, did you have a pump that was like feeding pressure to it, or did that storage tank, do those larger storage tanks work the same way, where they've got a bladder and you air it up, and those big ones just have enough pressure to get to everything?
They do have a bladder on them. There's 2 different ways you can run it. You can either use what's called a bladder tank, which is industry standard. That's what a lot of people use. If we get into the really, really big ones where we're pushing a lot of flow, then we'll use an atmospheric tank, to where it's an open tank, and then we put a delivery pump after it. So there's a couple of different ways that you can run it, depending upon how much water and how fast the water needs to go.
Gotcha.
But we can do either one.
Because I've noticed that when a builder plumbs for an ice maker line, they'll usually run like 1/2 inch line PEX to it, and if you want to try and feed your ice maker with that small 2.5 gallon or whatever tank that you've got under the sink, like it just doesn't create enough pressure to flow to like get up to that ice maker.
Yeah, and you'll get fridges that work off of either flow or work off of pressure. It depends upon the manufacturer of the fridge, and some of them will have pressure guidelines and some of them will have flow guidelines. With that permeate pump, it gets it back to where you're at line pressure pretty darn close. So one of the things that we'll find, another main thing is, I just don't get enough flow out of my fridge. With an RO, you're typically going to lose about 30% of your flow at your fridge the second you hook it up.
Just because of the internal components of it.
Yeah, just because of how it runs and all the stuff that it has to go through. But if we have that permeate pump added to it, your flow will pretty much stay pretty consistent, and you don't see that drop.
How are they going to... Well, here's the thing with my fridge. I only have an ice maker. I don't have one of those little water...
The dispensers.
The water dispenser thing. And the ice maker is like in the freezer type of thing. So are most people going to notice the flow issue if they have a dispenser, or will the ice not fully form? Like you get that hollow ice.
I was going to say, you might get to where your ice cubes come out smaller or hollow. But most of the time people will notice it on a dispensing basis. Gotcha. If your dispenser's coming out slow.
Gotcha. So I've actually heard people say that reverse osmosis, like that filtered water, when it's filtered to that level, that it's not actually good for you, because it's actually removing minerals that might actually be good for you. I'm just curious. I want to get your thoughts on that.
So when you really look at the minerals that are in the water, your body is grabbing very, 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 very small amounts of those minerals that are in the water. A lot of the water that you have, Calcium is going to be the main mineral that people are talking about. A lot of the minerals that are in there, they're in the wrong format, so your body actually kicks them out as waste.
Gotcha.
There's a organic and an inorganic form to all these minerals that are in the water, and a lot of these minerals are actually in the inorganic phase, or the calcium carbonate versus calcium bicarbonate, if you want to get down on a chemical basis or a molecular basis. So a lot of these things are in the wrong format, or your body can't even accept them. That being said, it's going to pull them. If you're that concerned about it, though, I usually tell people either take a multivitamin, because you're going to get a lot more out of a multivitamin than you're ever going to get out of your water. If you're relying on your water for all your vitamins and minerals, you're not going to get very far.
Sure. What about Dr. Pepper? Because I rely on Dr. Pepper for a lot of my
you need
nutrients.
plenty of vitamin D.
Okay.
So.
I'm also curious about this. The RO filters versus like the little filters where you can put the water in it and put the pitcher in the refrigerator, or you can attach it to the whatever it's called, the tap, and like
are we allowed to say names?
Okay. I don't care.
So like
we got no sponsors. We're not losing any money off of this.
Sure. so the number one thing that when you say the ones that you put in the fridge, it's the Brita filters.
Yeah, that's what
that's the ones that are the most common. Those are going to be a carbon-based filter. So you fill it up with water, you put it in the fridge, and it slowly goes through that filter.
Yep.
Carbon is good at removing chemical. That's about it.
So is that really just kind of for taste? Or
yeah.
Okay,
Carbon works for chemical, taste, discoloration, odors. Those are the things that carbon's good for. So it's gonna if you're using only carbon, I usually will call them like a cover-up filter, because you're covering up the issue. So the customer feels better about it, but you're not really doing much more than making things taste better without really making things better.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep. So with all of these different issues that could be with the water, I'm assuming that if you want to do some kind of water treatment, regardless, like softener, filters, UV lights that you mentioned earlier, that you should probably test the water to find out what all is wrong with it. But I would say the condition of your water currently, right?
Yeah. And there's tests that you can do in-house if you don't want to get too deep. So like TDS, how I said there's that probe tester, we can test it via probe, and we can tell you exactly what your TDS level is. Now, if you're wanting to know what that TDS is, typically you have to send that to a lab, and that can get a little bit pricey to find out what those chemicals or those combatants are, or the different levels of contaminants. But it can be done.
Now, when you say pricey, are you talking like a lab's going to charge you like $100, couple thousand?
So we've got a lab that we work with, and they will send you the bottles. You fill them up, you send them back to the lab, and about a week and a half later, you get results. Usually if you're doing it on a city line, I think their most expensive package is about $280. So it can get a little bit, when I say pricey, I'm thinking hundreds, not thousands.
Gotcha.
If you're on a private well, those ones can get a little bit more pricey because you're testing a lot more different things that are in the water.
So for the average homeowner, if they wanted to do some tests to figure out the condition of their water, what would you say are the most important things for them to test? And are there like DIY version, not DIY, but you can buy like a test on Amazon to test hardness, right?
Yeah, you can buy the TDS testers. You can buy those all over the place.
So let's real quick, let's tell them what are the things that top things that they want to test for. You said TDS, the total dissolved solids.
So if you come into our shop with a water sample and you say, I need to just test my water to see basically what's going on. If you're on a city water line, we're going to test your TDS.
Okay.
We're going to test your water hardness.
Okay.
We're going to test your chlorine levels.
Okay.
And then we're going to test your pH.
Okay.
Those are the 4 things that we'll test. If you are on a private well, we'll also test your iron levels.
Gotcha.
We deal quite a bit with problem water, and if you're on a private well, that's kind of where you're designated most of the time, is on problem water treatment, because we're dealing with a lot of other issues that are in the water.
Gotcha.
But those are the main things that we test for. Typically, if we know those factors, we can tell you exactly what we need to do or what would be the best thing for you to do.
Gotcha.
So water hardness, pretty much anything above 3 is where I'd say, yeah, we need to treat it. So pretty much if you live in the state of Utah, treat it.
Gotcha.
Chlorine levels, they can be anywhere from 1 to 3 parts per million typically is where the range is. We want to get those all the way to 0.
Okay.
pH, as long as we're neutral, we're good.
Okay.
There's not much. I've only ran into having to treat pH a couple of times here in the state, even on city water versus well water. Most of the time, pH is pretty well in check.
And then TDS, do you want to get that to 0 or?
So that's going to be a percentage of removal.
Gotcha.
So if you're above 220, that's usually where I tell people to start testing, start treating it. Because when you're talking about minerals in the water, and this is where it kind of overshadows leaving the minerals in the water for quote unquote healthy reasons. There's a lot of other things that make up TDS. So you may have a TDS number of 200 and maybe 112 of those are minerals and the rest of those are just different things that you may not want there, like chlorine or your nitrates, fluorides. Those are the 4 that most people key in on them. So we're trying to get rid of all those. Out where I live in Eagle Mountain, our TDS floats. I wish it stayed steady, but it doesn't. I've tested it anywhere from 380 to 400 on the low side, upwards to 700, 750 on the high side.
Wow.
Orem, here where your shop is, we're generally around 2 to 250. And it stays pretty well within that range. I definitely recommend treating it if it's over about 175 though. That's where I like to do it. But nationally, I mean, if it's above 220, that's kind of where people are saying, hey, we probably should get this filtered and cleaned up a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay. Last question, then we'll wrap this up. And I'm trying to think, like, is there a way that someone can tell that their RO membrane is done? Is it just that the taste comes back, or like, is there something else?
Taste is going to be more attributed to the carbon filters that are on there. As far as production rates, if you're starting to get to where the RO is not producing very much water, if it's running to the drain continually, those are a couple of things that you might notice as issues with the membrane itself. But the best way to know if it's working or not is with a test.
So, well, you bring up an interesting thing because, like you said, if you're not getting as much water coming out of the spout, I always thought that was more of an indication that maybe the bladder in the tank is like worn out.
It could be. Yeah, it could be that you've lost the pressure in the tank to make the air pressure so it can make the water pressure. It could be that. Easiest way to tell is if that tank's really, really heavy, it's full of water. If you pick that tank up and you're not getting any water and it's light, most likely you got a plugged filter.
RO, okay, gotcha. So that's a good thing then. Like if the RO membrane stops working, it's just, you're not going to let that contaminated water get past it. You're just going to end up with less water.
Yeah, it's just going to kind of block it off to where you're not getting much water through it.
Okay, perfect. That sounds like a pretty, good test right there.
I mean,
like,
most of the time you won't. There are times when you will test it, and I'll test an RO if I'm in a house doing some work for a plumber or something like that, and it will test 280 coming in, and after the RO, it's like at 187. Typically speaking, with our ROs, if just for an easy number at 100, if we're starting our TDS at 100, after the RO, I want it to be 10 or lower.
Gotcha.
I want to see at least a 90% drop, if not more. 90% is kind of my cutoff. If we're not at 90% at least, that's when I'm replacing a membrane.
Gotcha.
You can get upwards to 97 to 99% though with a membrane. But if it's producing at lower than 90%, that's when we're replacing them, because membranes, they don't just kind of go bad over time. They go bad and then they just spike.
So this TDS tester meter that you have where you just kind of dip it in the water, is that one that's like reusable over and over again? So it's not like a test strip type of thing.
Yeah, me as a service technician for our company, I do a lot of the service work. I've had the same TDS tester in my truck for probably about 3 years.
Oh, good.
And I've used it thousands of times.
Well, I got to come and get some figure out how to test these things so I can make some videos to show people how to test those things that you're talking about. But anyway, well, that was a good episode. I like all that information about ROs. Hopefully, you guys listening got some value out of that. Do this for me. Leave me a comment down below and let me know if you have an RO system. If you don't, or did you get any, like, give me some ahas. Like, was there anything that we talked about that really stood out to you, or is there anything that you want to know more? Jeff's already agreed that if we chock the comments full of questions, that he'll come back and we'll do some Q&A with them. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming.
Oh, no problem. Glad to be here
and talking to us again. Thanks again, everyone, for listening and watching the show. I appreciate your time. We'll be back next Tuesday with another episode of In the House. If you'd like to know more about Any Hour Services, visit anyhourservices.com. I've been your host, Mike Wilson, and you've been listening to In the House. See ya. Oh, there it is. Leave that in.